So, this will be my review of the movie Wicked. And FYI, there will be spoilers. So, if you don't want spoilers, leave and come back after you've watched the movie. Also, if you want to hear all good things about this movie and the cast, this will not be the video for you. But I will do the Wicked stands a favor and start off with what I liked about the movie and then discuss some of the symbolism. And then I'll end with discussing the optics of the movie and what I don't like. Also, be sure to watch the video I did on my second channel about Elphaba and how to thrive as an outcast. I will be doing more non-race related content over there and also on my website, femstrategy.com. So if you want to see it, make sure you subscribe to the channel as well as my website mailing list. The links are in the description box. Now, back to the review. So I actually had no interest in seeing this movie at all, but my mom wanted to go see it. And so I went with her and her friend, and I actually enjoyed it a lot more than I thought I would. Now, I don't care for Cynthia or Ariana's personalities in real life, but I thought they both did a great job in their roles as Elphaba and Glinda. They had really good chemistry in the movie. The acting and singing was on point. I saw one of the viral behind the scenes clips and I learned that Cynthia did her own stunts in the movie while singing live. Listen, that is talent. That is hard work. So I appreciate that. I also enjoyed all of the other characters. My personal favorite was Madame Morrible. I love a good crone antagonist in a movie. That is one of my favorite things. Also, the details in the set design were incredible. I love how colorful, whimsical, and detailed the set was. The wardrobe was also nice. I absolutely loved Madame Morrible's costumes, and I love Galinda's dress. The acting, the production, the set, the wardrobe, the attention to detail, all of it was very well done. So, despite my personal feelings about some of the cast and the optics, I thought the movie was really good. I definitely see some awards or nominations happening in the future. Now, moving on to the symbolism. This movie could be interpreted in many different ways, but for most people, it serves as a political allegory. The wizard obviously represents dictators or leaders who manipulate and oppress marginalized groups to maintain power, i.e., white supremacy. Elphaba symbolizes marginalized people who are discriminated against because of the color of their skin. In this case, her skin is green. Elphaba also represents the activists who fight against oppression. And I'm sure they intentionally chose a Black woman for this role because we are the face of social justice in the United States. The animals in Oz represent other oppressed groups that are dehumanized and discriminated against. And there's a parallel between Elphaba and the enormous empathy that she has for the animals due to her own struggles with being an outcast, to how Black women have a lot of empathy for other marginalized groups in real life. Galinda is the representation of privilege and perceived beauty and goodness and desirability. And she also represents those who are complicit in the oppression of marginalized groups. And of course, they intentionally chose a white woman to portray her. The casting choices were obviously very intentional. Now, when it comes to my own interpretations, Elphaba embodies multiple archetypes, but the main two are the outcast and the tragic heroine. And there's tremendous power in both of those archetypes. They both are very resilient, very courageous. They're not beholden to groupthink. They're not afraid to challenge the status quo. They can be agents of change and make a huge impact in the world. And they're deeply empathetic and caring. And we saw all of those qualities in Elphaba. And for me, she represents a lot of Black women and our empathy for other oppressed people and our incredible ability to make change, positive change in the world and in society and influence the masses. But unfortunately, our power is often used in the wrong places. And the scene where Elphaba was reading from the Grimoire and unintentionally using her power to help the wizard further subjugate the animals, for me, that was very symbolic. And it represented Black women unintentionally empowering the wrong people with our activism and our advocacy, and also using our powers to help liberate everyone but ourselves, which I talk about a lot on this channel. Elphaba, like many Black women, was very self sacrificing. And her not having control over her power, for me, represented Black women not knowing how to use our influence appropriately or as strategically as we could. And the wizard, Madame Morrible, and even Galinda represented all of the people who use and exploit our gifts and talents for their own personal gain. And ironically, Ariana Grande has been criticized for that in real life. She's been accused of appropriating Black culture. And that's a good segue to Elphaba and Glinda's relationship. The relationship that they had in the movie, for me, represents Black women's naivete when it comes to people who exploit us and who use us for their own benefit. Because Elphaba grew up being ostracized for being green and never had any real friends, she didn't see that Galinda was very self-serving and manipulative. And all the people Black women think are our allies in real life, whether it be white women, other women of color, Black men. For me, Galinda, the wizard, Madame Morrible, they represent many people who are fake allies to Black women and people that use Black women for their come up and discard us when we are no longer needed. And Elphaba inviting Glinda to the Emerald City when the wizard only invited her, for me, symbolized Black women trying to help people too much. Our lack of exclusivity and desire to include everyone, often to our own detriment. Because when you think about it, Elphaba put Galinda on by inviting her to the Emerald City. And later on in the story, Galinda works against Elphaba with the wizard and Madame Morrible. But Elphaba was the whole reason she got to come to the Emerald City. And in my opinion, there's a lot Black women can learn from the Galindas of the world, and that is look out for yourself. Because if you notice throughout the entire movie, whenever Galinda helped Elphaba is when it was going to benefit her. It was very clear that Galinda used Elphaba to get close to Madame Morrible because she wanted to study with her. And even when Galinda used her popularity to help Elphaba, she sang right in the popular song that you'll be popular, just not quite popular as me. So, like many people who attach themselves to Black women, she was perfectly okay with Elphaba getting some recognition, but not as much as her and not more than her, right? And I think she felt sympathy or pity for Elphaba when she danced with her at the Ozdust party, which, by the way, that scene was very moving. It made me cry like it did everyone else. But I do think Galinda genuinely felt bad for her and wanted to befriend her in that moment. So I don't think Galinda was all bad. Her character was very layered. But the point is, the friendship and the bond Galinda had with Elphaba never outweighed her own interest. And that is something Black women can learn from. Always put yourself first. I don't care how many friends or so called allies you have, because they will always put themselves before you. You better believe it. Galinda choosing to stay in the Emerald City instead of leaving with Elphaba, for me, that represents that they will always choose themselves, whether it be white women or, again, other women of color or people who are more privileged than Black women, choosing to take advantage of their privileges instead of rebelling against the systems that oppress everyone and staying behind to fight for the greater good. Nobody is going to do that for you, Black women. I'm sorry, they're just not. And for me, that was the biggest takeaway from this movie that I don't hear many people talking about in their reviews. Unlike you, Black women, most people are going to look out for themselves. There is no Emerald City or Promised Land or Utopia where everyone works together to destroy all oppressive systems. That place does not exist. That is not the world we live in and most likely will never be. It is a dog eat dog world. And for me, Elphaba realizing that the wizard had no power and that Galinda wasn't going to join her in leaving Emerald City, it represents that wake up call or reality check for Black women. And Elphaba getting to Emerald City and realizing that the wizard isn't real and has no real power, it actually reminded me of all of the different wake up calls that we as women and especially Black women experience in our lifetime, whether it be realizing that we have no allies and nobody's going to use their power or privilege to save us, or realizing that there's no sisterhood among other women of color, or that there's no sisterhood among Black women, or realizing that the Black man is not God. AKA the Wiz, and there's no real community, or waking up to how Black men as a collective feel about Black women in general, there are so many different ways that we can interpret the wizard and his fake power and his con artistry and the Emerald City. And when Elphaba chose to leave the Emerald City and refused the position that she was being offered by the wizard because she didn't want to contribute to subjugating the animals, it reminded me of how Black women often refuse to play the game and social climb and get ahead due to their ideas about social justice and morality and liberation. And because nobody else around us is really worried about that, at least not to the level that we are, we end up sacrificing ourselves in an effort to liberate everyone else. And because it's not possible for us to save the world alone, we just end up being outcast and villainized and labeled wicked, just like Elphaba. She and Black women as a collective really embody the tragic heroine archetype. We really do. And, I even see this parallel in the online work that I've done over the last almost 10 years for dark skinned women and girls. I've been trying to help dark skinned women get ahead. And in a lot of ways, it's ostracized me and made me the villain because most of us have become so complacent with colorism that we tolerate and accept it. And we reject and villainize and attack women like me who try to get them not to accept it. And Elphaba being villainized after leaving the Emerald City could also represent what happens to Black women when we refuse to follow the status quo, when we refuse to be used or exploited, or when we refuse to sacrifice ourselves for everyone else. When we actually prioritize ourselves, we're quote unquote wicked. And technically, in this movie, Elphaba wasn't prioritizing herself. She put the animals before herself. But, that's where her heart was at. That's what she wanted to do. But her being villainized for not following the status quo is exactly what happens to Black women when we refuse to tolerate anything that does not serve us, whether it be misogynoir, colorism, or any other abuse. And that is actually a good segue into the colorism that I picked up on in the movie. I took note of how Elphaba's mother and little sister Nessa Rose was racially ambiguous. The mother was portrayed as an object of desire. However, she was promiscuous, so that could be looked at as a hit on the mixed race woman's image or Black women, especially for those who follow the one drop rule. And the dynamic Elphaba had with her sister was very similar to how dark skinned and light skinned women are treated in the Black community. She was more coddled and more protected than Elphaba, even by her own father. And of course, the primary reason is because she was disabled and in a wheelchair, but also because she wasn't green. And so that is a parallel to the colorist dynamic that is often played out in Black families and the Black community between light skinned and dark skinned children. And because she was Elphaba's sister, she had no choice but to protect her. And for me, that was symbolism for how we are expected to protect, defend, and coddle light skinned women and mixed race women because they're our quote unquote sisters, no matter how much they undermine or disrespect us. Because let's be honest, disabled or not, Nessa Rose was not the kindest to Elphaba in the movie either. Something else that stood out to me was Madame Morrible being Asian. For me, Michelle Yeoh, her being cast as Madame Morrible, a villain that was essentially the right-hand man of the wizard, who is a white man, for me, and this is just me, that represented the high interracial marriage or dating pairing between white men and Asian women. I just do not think the casting of an Asian woman villain is a coincidence, being that the movie was directed by John Chu, an Asian man. Because listen, Asian men are all over the internet talking about how Asian women love and worship white men. So yeah, I'm just saying. And Asian men, they also like white women. We all know that. The Asian community in general idolizes whiteness. So looking at this from the lens of an Asian man, it makes sense that the villain crone or the villain antagonist is an Asian woman. The wizard is a white man, and the quote unquote good witch and representation of beauty is a white woman, a thin blonde white woman. I also noticed how there were no strong Black male characters, and it made me think that the animals could possibly be a representation of Black men. Not only, other marginalized groups, but Black men, especially because Elphaba was fighting for them in the same way Black women fight for Black men in real life. I don't know. Maybe I'm reaching on that one. Y'all let me know what you think in the comments. Now, moving on to the optics, meaning just the imagery of the movie by itself with no context. Optics wise, with no context, for me, this movie just looks like more of the same mean, evil, undesirable Black woman representation juxtaposed to the dainty, desirable white woman. Now, because I know the context of the movie, and how the Wicked story ultimately plays out, I know that Elphaba actually isn't wicked or undesirable at all. But it's like the movie strives to convince us that Elphaba or the Black woman is in fact not wicked or evil or mean, etc., and everyone else around her is, while also perpetuating the imagery and optics that subconsciously still make people think Black women are mean, undesirable, evil, etc. And I say that because most people just aren't smart enough to perceive it in its proper context. Because I've been looking at some of the reviews on this movie, some of the reactions. I've been reading the comment sections, and a lot of people still don't believe Galinda is actually a villain in this story. And it's primarily because of her optics and the glamour of Galinda that convinces them to look past her evil doing in the movie. And granted, she doesn't stay evil, but she's still a villain in the story. And there are people online actually arguing about that. And it's because they got tricked by her glamour and halo effect. So, in my opinion, the optics still, unfortunately, contribute to the problem that they're attempting to tackle in the movie. And for that reason, I just don't consider this to be corrective promotion for dark skinned Black women. And I can say that and still feel that the film was good overall. Both are true at the same time. And I feel like they still could have driven the point home with the Wicked Witch being white. It may not have been as moving, but we didn't need it to be, because who isn't aware of what Black women and other marginalized groups experience in this society? We don't need another unflattering depiction of Black women to remind us of that, in my opinion. Because whether you like it or not, Black women, these are the kind of optics that subconsciously make young Black girls and Black women especially feel undesirable and unattractive. And it adds to that perception among other people as well. What y'all need to realize is that most people are not deep thinkers. When they look at images in the media, they aren't adding context to the imagery. They're oversimplifying everything that they see. And when it comes to Wicked, all they see is the conventionally beautiful white good witch next to the conventionally less attractive evil Black witch. You may not see it that way, Black women. I don't see it that way, but that is how most of the world interprets it. And it's only adding to all of the stereotypes about Black women that we hate. And there were definitely other Black women in the movie, but they didn't get as much spotlight. So optics wise, they don't matter as much. In other words, they're forgotten by most people who saw the movie. And listen, I agree with everyone who says that Black women should be allowed to occupy a variety of roles, whether they be good, bad, or undesirable. But for me, the problem is that the bad or undesirable roles are always the ones that get the most visibility. And in a system of white supremacy, that is done by design. I expect white people and even other non-Black people of color to promote Black women unfavorably next to white women. I expect them to use white women to undermine Black women. That is just what they do. And in this film, they did it in a really slick way. They made sure that the Black women watching the movie would see it through a feminist, destroy oppressive systems kind of lens. And they wanted that to be the primary takeaway for us, so that the undesirable witch versus desirable princess optics would be more digestible. They wanted us to watch and think that it was only about inequality against Black women and marginalized people, and not also a way to undermine us, and specifically undermine the unambiguous dark-skinned Black woman. So knowing that, personally, I would have preferred that the witch be a white woman like she was in the play. I didn't like how Ariana, the white woman, had to teach Elphaba how to be feminine and girly. I also didn't like the "I'm not that girl" scene. The song was nice, but didn't really like the optics. It just further played into the downtrodden, undesirable Black woman narrative and how she feels she's unworthy and not good enough when the prince clearly wanted her. And look, y'all don't have to tell me. I know how the story of Wicked ends. but the optics during the lead up are annoying. I am all for black women being love interests in movies, but if they have to be undermined by a white woman to be love interests, I would rather them not be love interests. I would have rather the witch been played by a white woman like she always is. Like I always say, no representation of dark skinned black women is better than representation that is not corrective for dark skinned black women. I know that's an unpopular opinion among the collective of us, but that is how I feel. I personally am just not that desperate for representation that I'll take anything. It has to actually be beneficial to the image of black women. And I get that they wanted to make Wicked more diverse and woke so it'll have a deeper meaning about inequality and discrimination and all that. But the optics alone still add to the negative stereotypes about black women because we already have too much promotion that is unflattering. That's all I'm saying. And you also have to remember that there are a lot of people who are never going to see this movie, especially if musicals really aren't their thing. All they're going to be looking at is the images. They have no context at all. So all they see is the evil black witch next to this dainty white woman, and that is what they walk away with. And the same thing would apply if the witch were an older, undesirable white woman like she is in other films. They would walk away villainizing older white women, and that is done by design too, by the way. White men especially, they like to make older white women the villain in movies and pedestalize younger white women. And it's to devalue older women and make the viewer feel negatively about them, especially younger white women who are watching the movie. They intentionally try to divide younger and older women. This is how they like to condition people with these movies. And they do this with black women in terms of our beauty. This is also similar to how a lot of white women are discussing Ariana's weight loss right now. Well, both Ariana and Cynthia's weight loss, but especially Ariana, because she appears to be very unhealthy and underweight right now. And there's a lot of discussion happening about how the young girls watching her in this movie could be negatively influenced to undereat and lose too much weight. And we all know that young white girls and women especially suffer from EDs because of the specific promotion that is forced on them. So that's exactly what happens when black girls and women constantly see themselves depicted in these unflattering roles. It's damaging to their psyches and self-image. See, this is why corrective promotion is so important for everyone, not just dark-skinned black women, but for white women too. Now, personally, I don't look at Cynthia's role in Wicked and internalize that imagery. I don't feel undesirable as a black woman when I watch this movie. I don't personally look at Ariana and Cynthia and feel pressure to be super skinny or feel a desire to be as small as them. I like my body the way it is. But younger, more impressionable girls and women, they may not be strong or aware enough to not internalize that imagery negatively. And those are the people I'm concerned for. So if you're one of those women who say, oh, well, the role didn't bother me because it's just a movie, remember that it's not just about you. It's not just about you or what does and doesn't affect you. You are not the only one watching. Millions of other people are watching. Everyone isn't like you. And for those of you who are going to say, oh, this is just a movie, it's not that deep, listen. Movies help to shape the culture. They inspire change in the real world. They influence human behavior. They can perpetuate stereotypes, both negative and positive. And there are studies to back up what I'm saying. And movies that serve as political allegories, such as Wicked, they intentionally use storytelling to raise more awareness about what's happening in the real world. And they put all this symbolism in there to encourage dialogue and critical thinking about real world events. And they also do it to persuade and shape public opinion about what's going on in the real world. So no, they're not just movies. The media in general is a form of brainwashing. This is why businesses and corporations put so much money into marketing and promotion. So if you think movies and any other form of media is there solely for your entertainment, you're extremely naive. And you're probably among the majority of the masses who are most susceptible to being brainwashed and manipulated by the media. But yeah, in terms of optics alone, I absolutely hate the optics of this movie, and nobody can change my mind about that. And keep in mind, the optics on their own can be bad, and there can also be a deeper meaning in the movie about inequality, racism, oppression, etc. And it can be a good movie with talented actors. It can be all of those things at the same time. It doesn't have to be one or the other. And remember, black women, you are not obligated to like everything about all of your representation in the media just because they give women who look like you opportunities and acting roles. You don't have to settle just because they gave somebody who looks like you an opportunity. It is perfectly okay to both like and dislike things about this movie and any other form of Black woman representation in the media. Your thoughts, your feelings, and your opinions can be nuanced. They don't have to be binary or all good or bad. Mine are not all good or bad. I have nuanced thoughts about this representation. And yes, some of my thoughts, some of my opinions, and my feelings are conflicting, and that is okay. I am not obligated to feel one way or the other about this. I can feel different ways, and you can too. And also remember, Black women, that this is a movie, and Cynthia is not a mule in real life. She's very self serving, like Galinda, actually. I know she played Harriet Tubman, and she's an animal activist in Wicked, but she's not muling for anybody in real life, especially not other Black people. She doesn't even like Black Americans for real. I remember when Black women were calling her out for mocking Black Americans on Twitter for being ghetto. And she's also very close friends with other Africans who are very xenophobic against Black Americans. So it appears that Cynthia does really well at separating her acting roles from her personal life and from her personal feelings about Black Americans, because she's in a whole relationship with Lena Waithe, who I believe is an African American woman. Y'all correct me if I'm wrong. So all I'm saying is enjoy the movie, but don't internalize the imagery, the unflattering imagery. It's fine to internalize the good parts because, again, the movie is not all bad. Please don't start standing Cynthia Erivo. She did a great job performing in this movie, and this opportunity was good for her and her resume, but it's still not the best representation of dark-skinned Black women. And in my opinion, they need to stop allowing her to portray American Black women, especially historical figures. She had no business portraying Aretha Franklin or Harriet Tubman with her history. And I feel the same way about Black Americans portraying important Black figures of non-Black American communities. Let non-fictional historical figures be portrayed by the actresses and actors of their same nationality. There's more than enough talent out there. It should not be that hard. And that is all I have to say about that. So in the comment section, let me know your takeaways from the movie and any symbolism and parallels you made to Black women or women in general and our experiences. Also, let me know how you feel about the optics if you didn't go see the movie. Let me know what your immediate thoughts were when you first looked at the trailer or the promotional images. Also, be sure to like, share, and subscribe, and I'll catch up with you in the next video.